Moving on to the third team I have in this bottom tier, the Tennessee Titans. Now, I actually wrote up my thoughts and bullets for the Titans a few days ago, and since then, they announced that they benched Will Levis for Mason Rudolph. The first thing I have in my notes is Will Levis has been a roller coaster. The second thing I have is consider moving on from Will Levis. I agree with the Titans with the benching, especially the fact that they have a new coach. Now, I am typically on the side of the young quarterback or young player of any position and, saying that they don't need to start right away and they need time to develop and all this. Will Levis has a lot of struggles with his game that I don't think are going to go away. The things that I mentioned about giving players time to develop and being patient doesn't work for everyone, and I think Will Levis is one of those guys, especially when you look at his age. This isn't a 21-year-old Anthony Richardson, 22 now, that we're talking about. He's 24, and he hasn't had an incredibly long resume coming from college to the NFL in terms of games played. I see a lot of his issues as being things you aren't necessarily going to correct. A lot of the mental mistakes he makes, just where you need him to get to in terms of being a quality starting quarterback that takes care of the football, there's just such a huge divide between that and where he's at now. He has some of the worst pocket presence of any quarterback in the league. The amount of times he will either run out of a clean pocket or just run nowhere when he sees pressure, or make a lot of those stupid Will Levis plays we've been seeing this season where he's throwing pick sixes, trying to throw it while he's sideways, he's parallel to the ground and just throwing it up to a defensive tackle trying to get the ball out or whatever. That stuff is kind of tough to clean up. Not to mention the fact that the other traits he has, he has a big arm, but you look at some of the other things like his accuracy and his processing. I just talked about his decision making. A lot of those things just aren't very good, and it's tough to clean all of them up. Now, he is a solid athlete with a big arm. I wouldn't be surprised if they don't start him at all and get a new quarterback and plan to move on from him if he does get traded somewhere else or whatever and sits as a backup and maybe gets a little bit of a role. But I put that they should consider moving on from Will Levis in my notes, and they put Mason Rudolph in a day or two later, which I believe to be the right move. I mean, again, we are looking at a first-year head coach for the Titans that's trying to keep and secure his job. So from his perspective, it makes sense to get someone in that can hopefully get a couple wins and just, not make the coach himself look like a total idiot for trying to be the head coach of this team. Moving on from that, though, let's get to some of the other positional groups on this team. Calvin Ridley. Look, they gave him receiver one money. He's had a lot of really good moments this season. He wasn't worth the money. He hasn't lived up to the hype, really. I like Ridley a lot, but you look at the contract he got, and it doesn't add up to how he's been playing. Now, you can blame Will Levis for that and the offensive line and all that, but we're talking about someone that got, top-tier money. You're supposed to be able to elevate over those things, and he hasn't. So that's been a huge bummer. The other thing is, like I said, for a lot of these early teams in this power ranking, the O-line has been absolutely horrible. I think this is going to be one of their top priorities going into the offseason. Injuries have been relevant in how poor the offensive line has been doing, Lloyd Cushenberry getting hurt. But that doesn't excuse Nicholas Petit-Frere still being on the field, because I promise you, literally any other right tackle that you can find, whether it's on your practice squad, it's the third or second string, or whoever on your team, someone you can find in free agency, whoever it is, they're going to be better than him at playing right tackle. He is probably the worst tackle in the entire league. Treylon Burks hasn't really developed how you'd want either. They haven't found a good use for him. That whole thing has just turned into a complete shame, from trading A.J. Brown to the Eagles, watching what he's become as a receiver, literally a top 2, top 3 receiver in the league. He might be the best right now. And then you bring in Treylon Burks he just hasn't been able to develop, and you haven't been able to find that sweet spot with him on the team. Traylon Burks is someone that has a lot of talent, has a lot of potential, good athlete and everything. It's a real shame that they haven't found a way to get him going at all. And I think one of the main things, we're kind of I'm getting ahead of myself into the offseason moves here, which might be a good time to do that. But this ownership and the management, general management, the team building aspect of the Titans, it's been bad. Like, this is one of the worst run teams in the entire league. Their draft history is terrible. Their trade history is horrible also. And I was watching, I can't remember the name of who I was watching at this very second, but they were talking about how teams will, it was the Bootleg podcast, I just remembered, with Brett Coleman. They were talking about how a lot of these bad teams won't pay and won't re-sign players that they do hit on, whether it's in the draft or free agency. They will hit on someone and then not want to pay them because, it's just not right. They don't have the money, they don't have the cap space, they have other needs or whatever. And then that ends up being a big problem for them down the road or that season. And the Titans are one of the worst at that. They'll have any quality or good player that's on their team. They will find a way for them to not be on their team anymore and to trade them or release them or whatever. And, one of the guys they haven't done that with is Jeffrey Simmons. But, man, the Titans are so quick to move on from people, just like they did with Ernest Brown. Sending him to the Seahawks. Not that he was playing amazing football on the Titans or anything, but you look at him on the Seahawks now, he's playing really good football. And they just can't seem to learn from their mistakes whatsoever. So, in my opinion, the number one thing that's going to help the Titans is getting completely new ownership, new GM work, focusing on being able to draft and sign appropriate players and bring in actual acquisitions that will make the team prosper, because that's something that they're horrible at. In terms of Brian Callen, I feel like it's pretty obvious that you have to give him another year based off of all the issues that he's had to deal with and how the roster has looked. No, he hasn't gotten it done this year, but how many times can you just move on to a new coach? Not that the Jets have done that, or the Titans have done that. They've had Mike Vrabel for a very long time, which, by the way, if they just kept him, they'd be in a much better situation right now if they had Mike Vrabel. But it's not that they've moved on from coach to coach to coach. We just see that elsewhere in the league. I think you have to give Callahan another year. He's done some good stuff. I've seen some good fire out of him that's been implemented into the right spots. I've seen some good play design as well. You have to give him another year here, in my opinion, with, like I was mentioning with Daboll, give him his quarterback, whoever he wants, might be a free agency guy. I do think this is a team that could go to the draft, though, and look for a quarterback. Some of the other bright spots that this team has had is T'Vondre Sweat, who they snagged later in the draft than he should have been, has been a dog. He's played really well, and that's no surprise. I mean, this is someone I was seeing, going in the first round, and then he gets into some trouble, and teams have some concerns with him and his off-field stuff. Titans take a risk on him, and this was a hit for them. I just talked a lot about, how bad the management and team building, how bad the Titans are at that, and they did land T'Vondre Sweat, which is great. They overall had, as bad as the draft history as I was talking about, this draft wasn't horrible. I had a lot of questions about the J.C. Latham pick, and that hasn't proven me wrong at all, but you also get Jarvis Brownlee, who was a hit. That's a big addition to this cornerback room, which, moving on to what this team needs to do in the offseason, I think that's kind of an important aspect. This team needs a lot of work. This defense needs a lot of work. I think you keep the cornerback room as it is. L'Jarius Sneed hasn't really lived up to the hype, but again, a spot where you're dealing with a lot of injuries. And L'Jarius Sneed, Brownlee, a few of those other guys that they have on the team, I think that's going to be a really solid combination of cornerbacks to kind of fill out that room. Regardless of the cornerback room being solid, there's other spots that need addressed. Linebacker is one of them for sure. On the defense, they also had some injuries there that they're gonna have to, or not have to, but it's gonna be nice for those guys to come back next season, like Jack Gibbons. Kenneth Murray has it's just not a good linebacker. Let's just move on from that. He's not good. Then you look at their edge room, which is kind of whatever. I don't mind Harold Landry a whole lot, but they do really want and need to get a number one guy, or at least someone that can add just a lot more to this edge room and provide some pressure on the quarterback through pass rushing. So that's going to be huge for them. And then, like I mentioned at the start of the Titans talk, this offensive line is bad. And if they do nothing this year, they have to replace Nicholas Petit-Frere. That's going to be one of their main priorities, I think. And then, obviously, with a team like this that's ranked third or fourth or whatever, more issues. Quarterback, like I mentioned, that's something I think you could draft. If you don't want to draft, then there's going to be a few free agency quarterbacks to go after and then look for next season. And then you need another weapon for sure. I wouldn't be surprised if they look for a really solid tight end this year because, first of all, in the draft, there's a few tight ends coming out of college that I like and are pretty good. And Chico Okonkwo's a good tight end, but he's not like a traditional, well-rounded tight end. He's a really good athlete that plays tight end. They could be leaning into him a lot more on offense, but I think this team would benefit a lot from having like a real like 6'6", 250-pound, solid hand, good enough route runner, kind of tight end, someone like I don't know. Not that they could acquire this guy, but if you got someone kind of like Dalton Schultz, I mean, maybe they could get Dalton Schultz. I don't know, but Dalton Schultz doesn't fit the exact description as what I just described, but that's someone that just kind of came to mind as maybe that is a possible acquisition for them, and he would fit this team well and add something that I think they need. And obviously they need a receiver as well. So that is going to be it for the Titans.